While a lot of the work that we need to do in the context of deploying our quote-unquote VNFs from Akamai have to sort of interact with the automation and zero touch and so on. This is more of a perspective of someone developing like a VNF, particularly with the quest towards the edge, because if we're not going to get to the edge, or closer to the edge than Akamai already is, then it's really not interesting to us because we're already pretty close to the edge, depending on the definition or your definition of the edge. So in this talk, I'm going to just kind of give you an overview of what Akamai is doing, some of our products that we have, that, and just kind of sort of summarize with some perspective on what we can do today and what challenges exist. So obviously, one of the things that we're very well known for is our OTT delivery from the global platform. And we actually have three delivery options. There's the Global CDN, which is a pure cloud delivery for shared capacity for a set of our customers. Our customers are the ones that pay us, which are the content providers. Of course, we then do the best we can on behalf of our customers to deliver to their users. We also have two other offerings that are primarily geared towards effectively what you would call a network operator, where they want to deliver content on their network. So much content that they wouldn't contract that out to the global CDN. So they can get their own instance on network. And there is a managed version of that, and then there's also a licensable version of that. And the primary difference there is that the licensable version is one that the operator then owns and operates on their dedicated capacity. So the future traffic, what it may, and let me underscore the may part, may look like, is that the global CDN may have daily peaks of 300 terabits around the world. And with an average to peak ratio of 3x. That's pretty important because building out capacity to be able to do 100 terabits is already pretty expensive, and then being able to over-provision that to handle the daily peaks of 300 terabits is even more expensive. So how does one do that? Does one just keep buying the equipment? Does one just keep pumping it into the operator networks? Or does one do that more collaboratively with the operators as part of the NFV SDN transformation that's occurring? With the private CDNs, we are expecting to see peaks above 10 terabits. And typically those will have an average to peak ratio of 10x, and largely that's because the global CDN has a smaller average to peak ratio because we have a lot of other traffic to kind of just keep it pretty busy most of the time. In the private CDNs, usually there's a lot of VOD, and then there's a few live events that are really large, so suddenly you have these very large peaks. 90% of the global CDN traffic is video on demand over IP, and 99%, if not 99.9% of the traffic on the private CDNs is video on demand and live over IP. So that's sort of just the context of our quest towards the edge, all right? But where is the edge? So if this is an operator network, the operators have typically a set of top-level data centers. And Akamai for the global platform is already deployed in many of those, and quite frankly, we have contracts and equipment in thousands of these types of networks. So we're effectively, that was Akamai's edge in the past, right? Or is to some extent today. We're at these top-level data centers at various carriers. That's one edge. Another edge that's now growing is that the operators are building out sort of an integrated cloud, right? And then finally, the holy grail is getting to the access pops, the central offices, the mech stuff, right? And so there's been a lot of discussion in the last 2 days of the workshop and yesterday, like, oh wow, when you get there, it's 1 millisecond and tremendous bandwidth, and wouldn't it be great, all these applications from autonomous vehicles to crazy VR things and so on. So from our perspective, all three of those locations are the edge, and they look more like a hierarchy And this actually kind of maps very nicely a talk by Francisco Javier from Telefonica that he gave on Tuesday, that they also view this as a hierarchy, where as they build out the network as a hierarchy, there's going to be very little congestion in these sort of newly built out networks. And from our perspective, if we can get the caches that close, we can really scale up very quickly to all that bandwidth. The concern with that is that's a lot of equipment that only for certain peaks would be used, and most of the other time, at least from our perspective, would be unused. So we wouldn't want to pay for that equipment 24/7. Right, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to dynamically leverage this capacity, and so we've done a lot of work, sort of as part of the operational automation, and this is maybe the one slide that dovetails with this form in terms of we actually had to not build the entire end-to-end zero-touch setup the way Mr. Fukuda from NTT described. We needed to be able to understand how do we plug into that. What APIs do we have to expose in order to just play along? And every VNF vendor is going to have to figure that out again and again. So it would be good for that to become further standardized, so that we can that everyone can benefit from these types of capabilities. But zero touch is just from our perspective the building block. The other sort of policies you'd want to build on top of that is calendared horizontal scaling for example, like I said in the previous slide, where we would push the caches, the software caches closer to the edge in response to like a calendared event. So for example, if you're in Spain and there's every weekend there's wonderful La Liga soccer matches, you just scale out the caches there to kind of handle that 1 to 10 terabit of traffic, whereas most of the other times the traffic's much lower and you wouldn't need to have the caches deployed everywhere. You could have them more centrally deployed in the network as part of that hierarchy. Similarly, we also have capabilities where, based upon analytics provided by both our CDN technology but also by the underlying infrastructure, that we can offer through the same zero-touch sort of lifecycle APIs, the capability to do the scaling on demand. And primarily the horizontal scaling is for, we need a lot of capacity, and the on-demand scaling is to kind of elastically say, let's fine-tune over here because there's not many people watching in those data centers versus over there, so that so we can always right-size the resources relative to the actual demand versus the sort of estimated demand that was calendared. Through the same sort of scaling capabilities, we can then also do recovery, because recovery for us is sort of modeled as a scaling thing. There's something that didn't work, so we'll scale that in and then scale out a healthy version somewhere else. So everything is really done using the same zero-touch scaling functionality. That's the foundation, and the other aspects are just policies, and as we work with operators, they come up with more policies of what they want to do, but it all boils down to what we do in the most basic case for zero-touch provisioning. So is the software-defined edge ready? Yesterday I had a chance to speak with Don Clark, because about 6 years ago, prior to the first NFV white paper, I actually worked on behalf of VeriView, which was acquired by Akamai, on the first POC with BT and Intel and Wind River that sort of preceded the NFV white paper. And I was kind of sort of sharing with him my frustration about how long it's been taking for orchestration and everything to kind of at least get to where it is today. But he sort of reminded me that, like, well, but this has changed the industry, and these types of changes take a decade, so be patient. So I'm patiently waiting for this to kind of keep moving forward, but I'm glad that it is. From our perspective, the bottom layer, the virtual infrastructure management, this is pretty rock solid from our perspective. There's more that needs to be done in terms of using the enhanced platform awareness and having that consistently available everywhere, because we do all this work to try to leverage it, and then we show up in a POC or a production trial, and then all of the capabilities are not necessarily there, which is fine with us because we can just horizontally scale and use more resources. But in the end, the evaluation is in the efficiency of how you can serve these gigantic peaks. That was originally Mano or lifecycle management. That's the way I see it, is that there's a standardized lifecycle management component that OSM and to a smaller extent a certain portion of ONAP and various other orchestrators are doing a pretty good job at, and we figured out how to interact with those. There's the support and service order management systems, which from our perspective, they still talk directly to our network functions, and that's why one of my questions to Francisco was, in the day 2 operations, do these things now go through OSM? And I was very curious about that, because the standardization of our network functions, maybe it's simpler for other network functions like VPC and so on, but we have a lot of features and a lot of configuration options, and we just I don't know how to say, there are other cache vendors and they have different features than us. So the basic features we could quote unquote standardize on, but in the end, that's not what we think our customers would buy our technology for, because we usually have other features or upcoming features that actually make the caching solution more interesting, and how to standardize on that is quite a challenge. So I think the answer to this is a lot of progress over the last 6 years, but a lot more progress needs to happen over the next 4 years, given Don's 10-year timeline. Another thing is that, when I look at the plug fest, and when I look at the fact that there is no VNF form, right, that I am here as one of the few people talking about that's actually building the VNF, that is the thing that all the other systems get built around. It's, where are they? Like, why aren't there 500 or 5,000 of them? Why is there 50, right? And why are there, which is not a much bigger number than there were 6 years ago. That kind of puzzles me, but we're trying to do our best to bring more functions that can be used as part of the NFV SDN transformation. Part of that is the private LCDN that I mentioned earlier. That is a product that consists of several components that are already all containerized. We then have an EMS that controls that we can then use in multiple deployment scenarios. And that's another challenge that I think that quote unquote VNF vendors have a challenge with, because of the lack of reality of NFV at this time, we have to be able to deploy to all sorts of other environments, not just what's considered NFV, right? So we deploy to physical machines. Some of our customers just have virtual machines. Some of them actually orchestrate them using OpenStack and whatnot. Some of them are more software defined, meaning that they have some orchestrator involved. And then finally, as Google presented this morning, that K8 is coming. And I thought it was kind of interesting that K8 came from a Borg project, so I'm guessing resistance is futile to move towards K8. So we will, our solutions are already packaged in containers, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to get our containers to work in the context of a Kubernetes environment. So we'll be able to deploy all 5, support all 5 of these deployment scenarios. We originally did this just for the licensed CDN, and our carrier division is growing the portfolio. With the acquisition of Nominum, we're exploring how to do this with DNS, and there are some others that are coming as well. But these are all licensable pieces of software, which is unlike the services you would get from the Akamai global platform. So people always ask us, well, that's really nice that you have these few products that you can license. What about all the rest of the stuff that you have on the global platform? Wouldn't it be great to run that throughout throughout the network operator's network and deeper in the network? And so you're absolutely right. It would be great to bring the cloud services down and arrive at this wonderful Venn diagram where you're doing this fantastic stuff in the middle. And so what are the concerns there? So revisiting my future slide of what the traffic may look like, here I'm just highlighting different things, and you can see most of what I'm highlighting has to do with secure transactions for IoT. E-commerce and retail, which require very high security for doing PCI-style credit card transactions and so on. And then generally speaking, most, if not all traffic, not just the traffic that's going to the end user, but also the traffic internally with the back-end systems that sort of manage the communication between the VNFs and even to the EMS. All of that has to be secure, and that needs to be coming from a secure bootstrap in order for you to really believe that, like, okay, this thing out there that's trying to do this secure transaction with a back-end system isn't going to, is actually who we think it is, right? So if you can't guarantee that, then someone might be able to break in. I think the most famous break-in as of within the last 7 days is the fish tank one, so that I think everyone recognizes that. But there's also the ones where people get in through the HVAC systems at various retailers. And for us to bring the cloud services into the edge, yeah, absolutely, we want to benefit from the bandwidth and latency benefits that you would get there. But it's a challenge to do that if we also feel like it's going to threaten our business in terms of security. And so Akamai is a very, we're the global leader as for sort of trusted cloud services, and we were not going to give that up to gain a few milliseconds. That's just not going to happen. So there needs to be collaboration in this space. So the summary, sort of from the edge perspective, like, does security matter? Absolutely. I'm not sure how many of you were here on Tuesday in the forum that where Alex Leadbeater talked about the Etsy NFV security, but there's just multiple pages there. Go look at his slide deck and all of the security concerns that are there, and those are ones we're also concerned about that need to be solved to bring more of the cloud services towards the edge. Without bringing those towards the edge, if we just continue to use the traditional approaches, I think we can get one step closer by just paying more money to bring security out, but bringing it all the way to the edge will probably be just not affordable. Does latency matter? Absolutely it matters. But I would recommend that you take a peek also at Francisco's keynote on Tuesday, where he basically said that as they're building the networks, we keep hearing about mobile edge computing in 1 millisecond and how fantastic that is, and absolutely that's fantastic. But the hierarchy of the network that's likely going to be built on top of that will have fairly small latencies in addition to the 1 millisecond you see. And so the question really is, for many of the applications that are talked about there, is it really a big deal to do 10 milliseconds versus 1 millisecond? And quite frankly, I think 10 is generous. I think, for much of that connectivity, it can actually be less than 10 milliseconds. So it does matter, but for AR and VR, we also know for the human eye, about 20 milliseconds is pretty good, right? So it's unclear how close to the edge we need to get with some of these things, because there's various techniques that one can use to essentially fool us humans into thinking that it looks like real time. And then, does bandwidth matter? Well, of course it does, right? And again, VR was mentioned as one of those, like, oh, it's going to consume hundreds of megabits, right? That's that's if you do it in the naive way, right? But there are tricks where they use field of vision. That's the only thing that the human eye can see will be high quality, and everything else can be very low quality. You'll still see it on the peripheral vision. And as you switch, the latency there will matter as to how quickly it will go to high definition. But remember, about 20 milliseconds might actually do that. And there are actually software tricks out there to do that, such that 12K VR, which would usually require hundreds of megabits of constant data, is now roughly 4K HD, which is something that we believe is doable over Wi-Fi and LTE and for sure 5G. So, but in order to actually use, there will be some really big events that will require, that we will want to use more bandwidth, and for that we believe it's going to be more elastic scaling of these capabilities throughout the network. So I'll thank you for your time and take any questions if there are any, and I didn't really pay attention that I'm 4 minutes over time there. And so I apologize for that. Is there any questions, or should I just get off? Or?
Yeah, maybe just take one question. We don't have much time. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ravi from Verizon.
I spoke on that. You do have to speak up because it doesn't work that well.
Can you hear me? Is it better?
Now I can, yeah.
Oh, this is Ravi from Verizon. So I would like to understand, as a VNF vendor, Akamai, we know that we are all talking about how monitoring has to be done from orchestration, and how VNFs should be monitored, and this is all covered. But when it comes to the other angle, what as a VNF vendor, Akamai, what do you expect from service providers? What type of events that applications can consume and make the network as a service rather than only solving one aspect, but the other aspect, how do we should think about it?
Okay, I think the question was, what do we as a VNF vendor, let's just use the CDN as an application, what do we expect to get from you? That's a good question. Largely, we handle most of the analytics and the data internally, so we have an understanding of where the load is and how to shift it around. It's mostly in the early deployment stage or in the dynamic deployment stage of actually knowing where in the network are we, because that topological information it needs to be communicated to us. We can kind of guess it, but it would be much better if it was just ideally in a standard way, handed to us saying, here's where you are in the network, and you were configured as part of these parameters with the following sort of network capacity, so that we don't have to constantly second guess that. It would be much nicer if it was just given to us. Visibility, exactly. Thank you.